Hello everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Story to Screen podcast, the movie podcast where we review all different kinds of movies, new and old. I am your host, Chris. Well, I am flying solo tonight. No Ian, Josh, Trey, or Benjamin Curley. I'm all by myself tonight. Tonight I'll be reviewing the new movie from Ridley Scott, Exodus, Gods and Kings. Now, there's not really a whole lot for me to talk about concerning weekly segments, so we're just going to go ahead and just jump straight into the review.
You say that you didn't cause all this. You say this is not your fault. So let's just see who's more effective at killing. You or me?
When my love said to...
What you just heard was the trailer for the new movie Exodus, Gods and Kings. It stars Christian Bale, Joel Edgerton, and Ben Kingsley, and directed by Ridley Scott. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and just jump straight into my opinion on this film, because I don't want this to be a very long review, and since I don't have anybody to kind of bounce off of, I did not really like this film at all. I didn't think it was a very good film. And the disappointment is that it had so much potential as a film, especially with the talent that was involved and just the subject matter. I do view the story of Moses as one of the greatest stories ever told. Ever. I mean, it is, one of the greatest Bible stories also. The story of a man appointed by God to lead his people out of the bondage of slavery from Egypt. So you would think that a story like that, this massive epic story of just grand scale, and the combining talents of Ridley Scott and Christian Bale would make it a really, really great film, like along the lines of Gladiator or Black Hawk Down, something like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in any way, and here's why. The problem for me, it's the motives behind this movie. Well, let me just say something real quickly. Ridley Scott, who I think is a very good filmmaker, in my opinion, I would actually categorize him more as a visual artist. I think he creates some amazing images in films, like things that you would see in Blade Runner, or maybe even Prometheus. But I think a really great Ridley Scott movie is one that has a great script, and Ridley Scott bringing his directing style into that project. And I think his best films ever have been Alien, The Duelist, Gladiator, and Black Hawk Down. I think those movies benefit from having great scripts and just Ridley bringing his all in those movies, and they've I would consider those his best. The rest, I don't really consider that very good. Scott had famously stated, and I quote, "Any liberties I may have taken in terms of how I show this stuff was, I think, pretty safe ground, because I'm always going from what is the basis of reality, never fantasy. So the film had to be as real as I could make it." He's trying to say that he's approaching the story in a much more realistic vibe, and he's an atheist. And let me get that out of the way. Ridley Scott is a self-proclaimed atheist, and he doesn't believe in the Bible, he doesn't believe in God, he doesn't believe in Jesus Christ, which is sad, but Scott's motives here are that he wants to present this story, the story of Exodus, in a realistic fashion, and to present the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea in a more naturalistic manner. That doesn't include God. That has been causing a lot of controversy, and this movie has been getting a lot of controversy leading up to it, like Noah. but I think Noah is a much more kind of this weird fantasy-like film. This one is trying to keep. I give it this movie a little more credit because it's trying to maintain a bit of reality. But the problem here is that Scott is facing a dilemma of coincidence versus providence, the power of God, I should say. So in this movie, let me just give you a little bit of a heads up. God in this movie appears in the form of a child, and I for one don't know where that idea comes from, but in interviews he has stated that this could be an angel, a messenger. But the problem with that is that in the movie, the child says, "I am." So he is basically stating right there that the child is God. The problem with this movie is that Scott can't keep to the motives, his original intention with this movie, because it's not working. It can't work in that way. In the film, during the plagues, it's a bunch of this series of cause and effects type of plagues. We all know in the story that Moses confronts Pharaoh. He confronts him. He warns him, and that he was going to turn the water red with blood. But in the movie, there's none of that. What happens is that a group of alligators attack a group of Egyptian fishermen, and that's what causes the waters to turn into blood up until the lice. The problem with that is Scott is trying to make this argument that God had nothing to do with this. But the movie shows God, albeit in the form of a child, but it is kind of leaning towards that possibility that there is a spiritual hand at work here, that there's something much bigger. So I have to criticize Ridley Scott because he can't seem to nail his convictions properly in this film at all. He's contradicting them.
Bring her in. Bring her in. Miriam! Come, sit. Sit down. Now, I'm going to ask you some things that are going to seem very strange to you. I just would like you to answer them truthfully. How do you know Moses?
You know how I know him?
So you're not his sister, then?
Of course not.
Place your arm on the table.
Ramesses, don't take this any further.
Don't take this any further. What?
Do not take this any further.
Are you quite sure about that? Get your hand off it or use it. Now. Come on, proceed.
So yeah, you have all this weird stuff that he is trying to get across, and then the huge thing with the parting of the Red Sea. Folks, the parting of the Red Sea is the most famous part of the story of Moses. That is the stand-up moment. I mean, we have seen this so many times in so many other different films, all of the Ten Commandments. Here, he is trying to make a tsunami. There's no parting of the Red Sea. He is almost creating so basically the tide of the water goes down, which enables them to cross, but there's no parting of the Red Sea. But so the Israelites cross, but towards the climax, there is a tsunami wave coming, and then Moses and Ramesses are about to confront each other, but then the wave hits them, and then you find out that both of them survive. I call nonsense on that. I call absolute nonsense. Ridley is trying to stay in the reality that he has stated that he is trying to stick with, but he cannot succeed. And it's nonsense. It is absolute nonsense the way that he goes about it. This type of movie, Exodus, I don't think this is a very good movie at all. And there's some other problems with it. But I think the problem with this movie, and there's some other problems, but I just don't want to get into it because this is not, because I don't have anybody to really talk to and just other things. But the biggest problem with this movie is that Scott is, whenever he's done these historical epics, with the exception of maybe Gladiator, debatably, movies like Kingdom of Heaven and Robin Hood, Scott has always kind of been this revisionist history. I think he kind of believes in that stuff, or just something weird. And he's always taken these artistic licenses and have taken them in these really dull directions that kind of robs the stories of their own, the stories that make them so great, those moments and those ideas that make them great. And that basically applies the same here as well. I mean, the Ten Commandments is arguably one of the greatest stories ever told, ever bestowed upon mankind. I mean, it's real, and it is one that has just so many great moments in it. And Ridley Scott completely omits those moments. I mean, basically, like when Moses encounters God for the first time, it is a ridiculous scene. I mean, there's basically Moses has supposedly been knocked out, and that he's in a pool of mud, of all things, and then he encounters this burning bush, and the child comes out of nowhere, and they're talking, and the dialogue that is in the scriptures, the dialogue that we all know, is completely omitted, which is very disappointing. It's very disappointing that the movie doesn't play with those aspects. There's that. Moses' rod, or the Egyptians' rods turning to serpents. There's none of that. Ridley Scott just robs the movie of its own potential greatness. That of all those great moments that we've all know, that even an atheist might even know. It's like, and that's the kind of vibe that I've been getting for this movie. A lot of atheistic groups are looking at this movie and saying, like, that's not how it happened in the Bible. There's all these. It just doesn't work. I know I'm probably not explaining this very well. That's why I really improve when I have a host with me.
They're not Egyptians. They are slaves, Moses. What else do you expect? They wouldn't know what to do if all of a sudden they were left to fend for themselves like animals. Do not call them animals! Listen. From an economic standpoint alone, what you're asking is problematic to say the least.
I didn't expect to hear a simple yes, but I do not want to hear a simple no. Is that what you're telling me? Are you saying no?
I'm not saying no. I'm saying time. Time. You're listening to Hebrews.
I'm listening to Hebrews.
Who are you talking to?
God.
Another problem is that this movie has an amazing cast. You've got Christian Bale, Joel Edgerton, all these amazing, talented actors, and then you also have Ben Kingsley and Sigourney Weaver. I'm going to say this. I think it's a direction issue, because I think they're honestly poorly directed. Bale, who I really like Christian Bale. I've stated that several times on the show. But the problem here with Bale is that when he was first announced, I was like, okay, I can see where they're going with Bale. And it was just predictable. I mean, the performance was fine, but it was just like, oh, okay, that's what I thought it was going to be. And it just didn't work for me. And it just made it disappointing because he just didn't really bring anything new, which is kind of sad. So I do kind of wonder maybe if he had gotten an actor like Michael Fassbender, who he had worked with in Prometheus, but I kind of wonder what he could have brought if he had been given the chance. The biggest disappointment for me, I think, is Joel Edgerton. Joel Edgerton, who is a very fine actor, playing Ramesses, I thought was a really good choice. The problem is that I think it's more due to Scott's direction that the character is just being kind of portrayed as kind of Edgerton portrays him more as a drunken English pub dude. I mean, I hate to say that word, but he comes across as a drunken English man, and it's not convincing. He's not convincing in the role, and that's kind of a shame, and because I think if there's one guy to kind of follow in the footsteps of, Yul Brynner, that arrogant all power hungry individual. I think it was Joel Edgerton, because he can play villainy very, very well. And it's a shame because I think he's given not really the best material to work with. I think he has some great lines, but even the line delivery I think was kind of flat. And then you got Ben Kingsley and Sigourney Weaver. I thought these actors are really good, but they're just. I honestly think Sigourney Weaver was highly miscast in this movie, and Ben Kingsley was just given barely anything to do. I mean, honestly, I think Ben Kingsley should have played the voice of God or Pharaoh, one of those two, because I think he is more than capable of playing one of those. And you have also Joshua and Aaron in this movie, and they're just so underdeveloped. I mean, Aaron doesn't do anything. Oh, and here's another problem too. When Moses finally arrives, when Moses encounters God in the burning bush, he tells him, you know what you have to do, without really specifically saying, you have to free my people. The pieces of dialogue that we all know from the Bible. So he begins this whole vigilante nonsense by destroying, the Egyptian supply routes and all this stuff and facilities and all that stuff, and it kind of becomes this Dirty Dozen film, and it just doesn't work at all. And I'm not opposed to someone taking some artistic license and maybe trying to make it work, but the problem here is that you lose the genuine power of what this story is really about. You had this, powerless nation under extreme captivity and just under the ruthless rule of a pharaoh, and they all had to rely upon the power of God to set them free. And that's what makes it such an incredible story. And that's completely omitted from the movie. Moses is then off into this vigilante thing, and the dumb part about it is that because of that, the plagues are caused because of his choices. And it's just nonsense, and I'm really sick and tired of this movie. And, honestly, it's not a very good movie. I don't think it's a very well-written film. It just denies itself its own potential greatness, because it's denying Scott, the director of this movie, is denying the great source material that is there, the great dramatic, powerful story that is there. So so in terms of a ranking, I give this movie 3 out of 10 plagues for quality watchability, because it's not necessarily like a downright despicable film, but it's just another one of those biblical movies that it's just forgettable. I'll just put it that way. It's just forgettable. Yeah. So anyway, so the Ten Commandments is still number 1 on my list. So even after many years, DeMille's classic is still on top, so good for him. Well, that's going to do it for my review of Exodus, the atrocity. But anyway, you can check us out on Facebook and subscribe on iTunes. And also, Ben and I will be reviewing Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, very soon, which is coming out this week. So take care, everybody, and good night. Cheers.